in this issue when I was getting my master's degree in public policy, which is a degree that you could take right after you're done with your undergraduate studies. I was actually getting my degree at Georgetown, so I was living in Washington, D.C. At the time. And one of the things that I did, I thought I was going to work for the federal, I thought I wanted to work for the federal government at the time. So around your age, and I thought that this is what I wanted to do. And I was interested in housing policy in the United States. So I actually got a job for a year working for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And in my job was to provide research support for the main research component of HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And during that time, that major research division was focused on homelessness research. So it was very, very interesting because I got to see a couple of things in play. First of all, I got to understand a little bit more about the homelessness problem in the United States, understand what it looked like. I also got to understand what homelessness looks like in different regions of the country. So one of the projects that we worked on was to conduct focus groups of people who are providing services for the homeless population. And we wanted to ask people across the country, what were areas were they having difficulty in providing services for their homeless population, and could the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development do anything to change policy to help them? So was there something that we were doing in Washington, D.C. that was impeding their ability to provide goods and services for the homeless population? Okay. So that was fascinating, and I got to be on a lot of phone calls. These focus groups were conducted on conference calls, so I got to hear from people all over the country, basically yelling at us and telling us all the things that we were screwing up in Washington, D.C. that were creating problems for them as they attempted to provide services to their homeless population. Also, one of the things that I got to see, which was very, very cool, because I'm a nerd, and this is what we nerds like to see. One of the biggest political hot potatoes when it comes to housing policy in the United States is counting the homeless. Counting the homeless, and there are a variety of ways that we can try to count or estimate the number of homeless individuals in the United States. But why might you think that counting the number of homeless might be a political hot potato issue? What can you imagine? Why is that political, or have importance politically? Dante.
The results of the census are used to determine representatives, how representatives are allocated.
Yes.
And funding for certain programs.
Exactly. So I was going, definitely the number of homeless might affect, for example, political representation in Congress, because you want to make sure that members of Congress are representing equal numbers of people. But I was thinking more about the latter. The higher the number of homeless individuals in the United States, perhaps the higher budget that the federal government will provide to meet those needs, right? So you might imagine that nonprofit organizations and interest groups had a strong interest in making sure that that number was high or low. High, right? In a way, they want the HUD to err on the side of that number being high, because in their minds, and that would give them a greater budget to work with to give services or provide services to the homeless population, right? So I remember that when we were doing our estimate, there was a big embargo on the number, and we couldn't talk about it to the press, and it was until a certain day, and then the report was released, and you get this every year. HUD comes out with an estimate of the number of homeless individuals, and we couldn't do any media inquiries. Like if the media asked us any questions, we couldn't respond. We had to refer them to HUD's own media department. So that was really interesting to me as well. The ways in which this type of counting process is very, very political, and it's political for important reasons. a definition of what it means to be homeless, yes.
How did you guys go about counting homeless?
So there are a variety of ways to count. One particular way is to have workers actually and volunteers go out on a specific night and actually count people, both in shelters and in areas where people, the homeless population is likely to reside, okay? That's one way, right? Then there are a bunch of other ways that involve more estimating ways, okay, yeah?
And they're not counted in the poverty population.
It depends on, the particular program that is in existence, right? So it depends on if a program is designed to meet the needs of this population, of course it's gonna count them, right? So one of the things that I wanted to do, first of all, before we get into this discussion, is just to give you a definition of the homeless population, or who a homeless individual is. So generally, we think of homelessness as a person who lacks adequate nighttime residence, or whose nighttime residence is a shelter or public place not intended for sleeping. It's a person who lacks adequate nighttime residence or whose nighttime residence is a shelter or a public place not intended for sleeping. A person who lacks adequate nighttime residence or whose nighttime residence is a shelter or public place not intended for sleeping.